id Software has recently opened up several job listings for an upcoming game they are working on. The game in question is an iconic action FPS game that is old, established, and still in progress. The job description for the Skybox artist specifically states that they are seeking a team member to join so that they can design landscapes and elements from the sci-fi and fantasy worlds for a AAA quality game. Now, after these job listings, people have theorized that a new Quake game is in development, and I can definitely see why they would come to that conclusion. We've recently got a Quake Remastered during QuakeCon, which I do need to make a video on that at some points, and also, the franchise hasn't had a new installment in a while, so it would make sense that a Quake game would be planned. Not to shit on the idea of a new Quake game happening, but I don't think a new Quake game is in development, unfortunately. The job listing is more than likely for a new Doom game, as maintaining that series appears to be id Software's focus as of late. There are tons of sci-fi and fantasy elements in Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, and in my mind, that is the project they are hiring people for. Doom Eternal is almost 2 years old, and while it's still being supported with new updates and master level content, id Software must be looking towards the future, and are probably in the early planning stages of a new Doom game. Let's go back to the Quake idea though. Quake is a weird series, and it shouldn't even really count as one if we look at all of the games. Quake 1 is still a very good game, and it was one of the first shooters that was actually 3D, but I don't think it holds up as well as Doom. Regardless, it featured Lovecraftian elements, Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails composed the soundtrack, and it was quite a gothic looking game. Very drab, very moody, and very atmospheric at times. Quake II wasn't even supposed to be a sequel to Quake, but instead the start of an entirely different franchise. And it's obvious. Quake II rejects the fantasy gothic look of the original and lends itself more to science fiction. Although there are only a few loose strands of story in Quake 1, Quake II doesn't acknowledge them, and instead has a new plotline with the Strugg and Human War. Quake 1 and Quake 2 couldn't be further apart from one another, and Quake 3 ignores all previous entries again by being multiplayer only. Sure, Quake 1 and 2 characters are playable in the game, but come on, Quake 3 is an entirely different beast. Again. Quake 4 was developed by Raven Software instead of id, and it finally tries to connect to a previous Quake game by including the Strugg storyline from Quake 2. I'm going to make a video at some point revisiting Quake 4 and giving it an updated review, so I won't say too much here. The point being is that Quake 4 attempted to actually be a sequel, which I respect, since up until then, Quake 2 ignored Quake 1, and Quake 3 ignored both games. Quake 4 couldn't be called Quake 3 because Quake 3 already existed, so fuck it. Quake 4 is its name and it ties into Quake 2, but not the original or Quake 3. Fucking hell, man. After Quake 4, there hasn't been any other single-player offerings from the Quake franchise, and it's now become a multiplayer-focused series. So it's now 2021, we have a Quake 1 remaster at least, and even though fans want it, I don't think a brand new Quake game is gonna happen. Why? Because where do you fucking start? Let's say that id Software were planning to make a new game. Do you make it a sequel to Quake 1 and ignore Quake 2 onwards? Well, Quake 1 didn't really have a story. That game was the definition of throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. Of course you have the Lovecraft references with the final boss and everything, but most of it was so vague. As an alternative, does id Software try to make a sequel to Quake 2/Quake 4 and have the Strugg return? Or do they try to throw the Strugg and Lovecraft plotlines together in some sort of weird gaming clusterfuck? I'm not too sure, but I personally wouldn't want to figure all of that shit out. In any case, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal have borrowed a ton of ideas and mechanics from Quake, and I can see id pushing that further. The Quake Guy skin is even going to be available to unlock in Doom Eternal sometime soon. I wouldn't be surprised if instead of a new Quake game, they slowly introduce more concepts from the Quake series into Doom. This could even mean that Quake enemies or locations make an appearance. I mean, slipgates are a thing in Doom Eternal, so anything is possible. With that said, I wouldn't mind a new Quake game at all, especially if they return back to that gothic style. I just don't see how they pull it off. But that's why I'm not a game developer. How do you think they'll design a new Quake game, and which entry will they continue from? Quake 1, Quake 2, or fuck, even Quake 3? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time.
What do I know? Spend a night hitchhiking, where will I go? I can fly when my eyes close, but if you